This is a moderator, and welcome Board Member Adams. Would you like to do a quick mic check?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, wonderful. And I'm going to start the recording. You'll hear a quick announcement and then it'll be quiet.
This meeting is being recorded.
All right, Mr. Chair, begin when you're ready. Oh, I think you're muted.
Thank you. Okay, I'd like to call the meeting to order, and this meeting of the Board of Chiropractic Examiners Continuing Education Committee is being held by teleconference pursuant to the statutory provisions of Government Code Section 11133. The date is Friday, December 2nd, 2022, and the time is 12:31 p.m. The board's paramount responsibility is to protect the health, welfare, and safety of the public through licensure, education, and enforcement in chiropractic care. Members of the public may address the committee during the public comment session. Public comments will also be taken on agenda items at the time the item is heard and prior to the committee taking any action on said items. Those who would like to provide public comment will be limited to 3 minutes, unless in the discretion of the committee, circumstances require a longer period. Members of the public will not be permitted to yield their allotted time to other members of the public to make comments. Individuals may appear before the committee to discuss items not on today's agenda. However, the committee may not discuss or take action on these items except to decide whether to place the matter on the agenda of a future meeting. Please be aware that this meeting is being recorded. Please turn off or silence all cell phones. We will now take roll call. And Dr. Adams, would you please take roll?
Yes. Dr. David Paris.
Present.
Dr. Lawrence Adams, present. Dr. Pamela Daniels.
Present.
We are accounted for and have a quorum.
Thank you. Okay, moving to agenda item number 2, review and possible approval of October 6, 2022 and October 25th, 2022 committee meeting minutes. And I would open this for discussion. Are there any questions, comments, or changes to the October 6th and October 25th, 2022 meeting minutes?
I move that we approve the minutes as outlined.
I'll second.
Thank you. Hearing no further discussion, I'll ask the moderator to open this agenda item for public comment.
Thank you, Board Chair. I have opened up the question and answer panel. If any member of the public would like to comment on this agenda item, please type comment using the field in the lower right-hand corner of your screen and send it to all panelists, or you may simply raise your hand. For people accessing the meeting through their phone, you can press *3 to raise your hand. We'll give you a moment. All right, I see no request for comment at this time. Shall I close the Q&A panel?
Please, thank you.
Okay.
Dr. Paris, can I interrupt real quick? This is Sabina.
Yes.
I just wanted to make sure we included the date of October 6th, 2022 and October 25th, 2022 in our motion, so it's clear that we are approving both sets of meeting minutes.
Would you like me to reiterate the motion?
That would be wonderful. Thank you so much.
So I move that we approve the October 6th and October 25th minutes as outlined previously.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Do you still second that, Dr. Daniels?
Yes, I second it.
Okay.
Thank you. Hearing no further questions, comments, or discussion, Dr. Adams, would you please call roll for the vote?
Yes. Dr. Paris.
Yes.
Dr. Adams, yes. Dr. Daniels?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. Moving to agenda item number 3, update on the board's continuing education program. And I would invite Ms. Walker to provide an update on the board's CE program.
Sure, thank you. I'm going to keep my update rather brief today. We did recently meet in October, and we also have a pretty heavy agenda item coming up right after this. So I'm going to touch on 2 main topics. The first is the Connect project, and then our pending regulations. So since the last meeting, we've been continuing to work on our business modernization project and fully implementing the Connect system. Improvements that have been recently implemented are with the online renewal process for the Doctor of Chiropractic license. The previous CE upload functionality has been removed from that application and instead replaced with the certification question that mirrors the paper renewal process. We've also updated the renewal process for satellite certificates by prominently displaying a clear renewal button on the dashboard, and then also removing the prior contingency that in order to process that application, your Doctor of Chiropractic license had to have been renewed as well prior to accessing the application. We've also, in recent months, we've developed the ability for licensees to store their continuing education records in the Connect system, and we're currently in a testing phase for that functionality. And we do plan to include that in the next release. And then we're going to also develop a method of ensuring that the records that have been previously submitted by licensees through the renewal process appear on the licensee's dashboard. We plan to implement those updates as well as another round of system enhancements in early 2023. At this point, the timeline is contingent on the completion of cashiering functionality that's being developed, not just for our board, but also for the acupuncture board, where we're going to be transitioning our current manual cashiering processes into the system. Are there any questions on Connect?
I have no questions on that.
Okay. The second item I wanted to touch on is the pending regulatory proposals we have that affect continuing education. They're listed in the meeting materials, actually in prioritization order. So we now have 4 of them. The first of which is the annual continuing education requirements for licensees and the continuing education course approval process. In summary, this proposal is to update.
Excuse me, Ms. Walker, real quick. I just got a text from Dr. Daniels. Apparently she's out, I guess. Oh, she's back. Okay. I don't know what she did or didn't hear. Yeah. Dr. Daniels?
Yeah.
What was the last thing you remembered?
Yeah, all your videos went away. She was just talking about the Connect program. It's like at the very beginning, the whole thing just crashed.
Oh, okay. So you got most of the audio?
I just got her introduction.
Okay.
So it didn't crash on your guys' end?
No.
Sorry. Okay.
That's okay. Dr. Daniels, I was just touching on improvements that we've recently made to the licensing renewal functions, which I'm also going to cover during licensing committee. And then also what we've developed is a method to store continuing education course records on the licensee dashboard, which we're planning to implement in early 2023. At this point, we're currently testing that functionality. And then once it's implemented, we're also developing a method to take the records that have been previously provided by licensees through the renewal process and store them prominently on the licensee's dashboard. So they don't have to go back and upload them again. We'll load them in ourselves.
Great, thank you.
Sure. Let's see here. And then, so the second portion of my update has to do with the regulatory proposals that we have for continuing education. They are listed in the meeting materials in order of prioritization at this point. The first of which is the annual continuing education requirements for licensees and the continuing education course approval process. Really, in summary, this proposal is to update the annual CE requirements for licensees, establish the 5 competency areas that will be approved by the board, define the 3 different learning formats, and update the course approval process, and then implement a new reapproval process for courses that have been previously approved by the board. This proposal is what will be discussed today in detail under agenda item 4. Second, we have the proposal to require basic life support or CPR certification as a condition of holding an active license. Staff has reviewed the language that was previously approved by the board, and we do believe that some further clarification is needed so that we can move forward with that regulation. And our plan is to present this proposal to the committee for discussion in early 2023. Third, we've separated the proposal for continuing education exemptions and reduction of requirements. And one of the main reasons for that is that the language that we'll discuss under agenda item 4 for section 364 outlines the circumstances where a licensee is automatically exempt from the CE requirement, such as circumstances where they're holding an inactive license or the licensee is currently on active duty in the military. So with this proposal is to create a separate process for the board to grant a hardship exemption or modification to the CE requirement when a licensee has been adversely affected by a natural disaster or state of emergency or any other circumstances that the committee may deem would be appropriate for granting that type of hardship exemption. So this proposal is currently being developed by staff, and it will be brought back to the committee after we get through the 2 packages that I just outlined above. And then lastly, we have what we're branding as the CE provider approval process and updated appeal process for the denial of a CE provider or course application. So the purpose of this proposal is to implement the other updates that the committee has been discussing about enhancing the CE provider process and also updating the process for either denying a course application or a providership. And also there had been discussion about implementing a notice of violation when either a provider or a course is not in compliance. So that proposal is still being developed by staff and being discussed at the committee level, but we've separated that out into its own component because you'll see that some of those changes need further discussion before we can move forward. Are there any questions on the latest grouping of the different CE proposals?
None from me. Thank you.
Okay. That concludes my update for today.
Okay. Thank you. Are there any further questions or discussion by the committee members?
None for me.
None for me either.
Thank you. Hearing none, moderator, would you please open this agenda item for public comment?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm opening up the Q&A panel. If any member of the public would like to comment on this agenda item, please type comment using the field in the lower right-hand corner of your screen and submit it to all panelists. Or you may simply raise your hand. If you've called in, you would just press *3 to raise your hand. We are displaying instructions and we'll give you a moment. All right, I see no requests. Shall I close the Q&A panel?
Yes, please. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you for that update, Ms. Walker. That reminds me of how big of a lift this really is, at every level. There's a lot of moving parts here. Thank you. Moving to agenda item number 4. Review, discussion, and possible recommendation regarding proposed changes to the annual CE requirements for licensees and the board CE course review and approval process. And Ms. Walker, would you please give us a staff report on this agenda item?
Sure, thank you. So within this item itself, there are a number of points for discussion by the committee today. First of which, so within the meeting materials is proposed language to amend California Code of Regulations, sections 360 through 364. And within that language, it reflects the committee's discussions to date on the various components of the annual CE requirements, and then also the course review and approval process. So I can briefly walk through that language, and then there are some staff recommendations, and there's also a few additional policy questions that we have for the committee to discuss. So with looking at the language itself, section 360 is the section that outlines our fees. We've simply gone through and updated the fee amounts to reflect the amounts that will become effective January 1st of 2023 through Senate Bill 1434. And we've left a placeholder there for a new fee for a course that's been previously approved by the board. What we intend to do today is to discuss the framework of these regulations with the committee, and then based on the committee's discussion and feedback, we'll then take that information back to be able to calculate a number of different scenarios and provide a range of options for administering the fees, not only for initial approval of a course, but for reapproval of a course. Section 361, what we've done with that regulation is that we've tried to group all methods to where you can earn continuing education credit into one section. We've identified a tentative implementation date of January 1st of 2025 with the goal that this regulation is put into effect no later than January 1st of 2024, and then allowing for a 1-year period for which previously approved applications under the old process would expire. We can get new applications into the system and then have fully implement the requirements so that licensees that begin renewing in January of 2025 have complied with the new requirements. So it's to allow additional time for everything to take effect. Within that section as well, subdivision C outlines the mandatory requirements that were discussed by the committee. With the exception of subdivision C4, staff has a recommendation for renaming that particular competency area, which I'll get into in a minute. Then getting to subdivision D, that's where we've outlined the additional activities that would qualify for credit for continuing education. Currently, the regulations are somewhat confusing because we have 361 where it outlines the board's requirements for continuing education, but then the other activities that you can also earn credit through are actually in 364. So what we've done here is taken a lot of what was in 364 and struck it from that and put it right here so that if someone's reviewing the regulation, they just get a nice clean list of all the different methods in which they can earn credit towards their 24 hours. We've placed in this, well, I'll get to the staff recommendation on completing sexual harassment prevention training. That hadn't been previously approved or discussed by the committee, but it's a recommendation that staff has for granting credit just in light of the fact that California law requires employers of five or more employees to complete this level training. And if the committee would consider granting credit to licensees when they've completed that program. Another item is that we'll get into that we have a question on is attending a board meeting. At the previous meeting, there was the discussion by the committee of increasing the number of hours you could earn for a board meeting from 4 to 8. And now the staff question on that is whether or not, the way it's currently worded, it requires that there be a petition hearing for you to receive credit. Well, under our new schedule starting in 2023, we're only holding petition hearings at 2 of the 4 board meetings. So it's worth the committee's discussion on whether or not it's appropriate to grant credit solely for participating in a board meeting, regardless of whether there's petition hearings occurring during that meeting. The rest of these are just copied from what we already had in place with participating in exam development as an NBCE examiner, teaching continuing education, and completing coursework through other agencies. Getting to subdivision E, that's where we've outlined the limitations and restrictions on continuing education. These are what had been previously discussed by the committee with the exception of subdivision E2. The staff recommendation is that the committee consider limiting the number of hours that can be completed within a single day to 8 rather than 12. We just believe it's overly burdensome to complete 12 hours of your continuing education in one calendar day. So that's one item for the committee discussion, but we can put it back to 12 or keep it at 8. Subdivision F, we've made a first attempt at defining the competency areas. So we would be seeking the committee's feedback on any of those definitions if you have any comments or suggestions for those definitions. And with competency area 5, which is the electives, that's the broad topic that the committee's discussed about offering general continuing education credit for just about any topic that's related to the current knowledge, skills, and abilities needed for competent practice of chiropractic in California. We've kept some of the language that was in the prior, that was in current regulation here as a bulleted list of examples of what qualifies. But if the committee has any suggestions or recommendations for further topics that we could include in this list, that's one item we would like to hear from the committee. And then also just to clarify for anyone in the public on the line, the discussion for the electives, this list here isn't meant to be the only topics. This is just examples. The competency area itself is very broadly defined to accept continuing education courses. And that concludes 361. That one, it has the majority of the changes within this regulatory language. With section 362, which is the continuing education provider approval process, the one item to note there is that it's been developed and broadened to recognize either providers that are approved directly by the board or to reflect the board's prior discussion of recognizing PACE providers to be able to apply for approval of continuing education courses through the board. So what it does is establishes two pathways to where you're eligible to file the application for your continuing education course to be approved. You've either been approved directly through the board or you have PACE recognition under this language.
Ms. Walker, I have a clarification on that one.
Mm-hmm.
Previously, we had still wanted to maintain oversight with the board to review the courses. It was one thing to be a PACE approved provider, but the course that they would submit still has to go through our approval process, correct?
That's correct. Yeah. So that's how this is structured here. Is section 362 is for the providers. So we've defined the PACE provider, but then when we get into section 363, the reason we've defined it there is so that regardless of whether you're a board approved provider or a PACE approved provider, to be able to offer board approved courses in any of the 5 competency areas, you still have to go through the same course approval process. It just allows PACE providers to bypass the initial provider application and then paying the biennial fee.
Right, but just if they're an instructor teaching a course that's been approved by the PACE process, that's not automatically grandfathered, right? That course still has to be reviewed by our staff and by our board potentially, correct?
Yes, correct. Yeah, the courses themselves still need to be approved by the board. It's just that the providership doesn't have to be vetted through the board before they're eligible to file that application.
Yeah, thank you.
Sure. Let's see here. And then navigating back here. Section 363 outlines the approval process for the courses. At the October 25th meeting, the committee talked about extending the approval period to a 3-year approval period. We've kept the same definitions for the learning types, but you'll see that we added the terms either synchronous or asynchronous to further help clarify the 3 different learning formats. So in-person learning experience is in-person, synchronous learning, the live and interactive courses given via electronics means is synchronous learning that occurs at the same time but not the same place. And then distance learning is defined as asynchronous coursework. We have within there, we've outlined the different requirements for applying for approval. And then within subdivision D, what we've done is actually put the course approval process in the regulation. It's not currently outlined, so it doesn't provide clarity to all parties involved. So with that, the process itself would be that within 15 days of receipt of the application, staff would review it for completeness. And if there's any deficiencies, that information would be sent to the provider along with a deadline of 90 days for them to correct the deficiencies in the application, or otherwise it would be deemed abandoned. We do have applications where we get partial applications and then they tend to age and we don't have a very clear method of truly deeming them abandoned so that we can move forward. So we've included that as the initial review step. And then that second step is that within 30 days of receipt of a complete application is when the determination of whether to approve or deny the course would be made, and then that determination would be issued to the provider along with their approval number, their expiration date for that course, or if we're denying it, the reasons for the denial. We've kept the denial, the existing denial process consistent, just because, for simplicity's sake of moving some of these other items, these more urgent items forward, the committee could discuss that at a future date under a different package. All of this kind of just reflects one area that needs to be further discussed today is the reapproval process for a continuing education course, just really establishing what would qualify for reapproval versus filing a brand new application. So we can discuss that today. Section 363, 363.1, I apologize, the distance learning, we've made no changes since the committee's prior discussion of this item. And then finally, section 364, which is the exemptions from the requirement. As I had kind of outlined, what we're doing there is this regulation here is being simplified to just lay out the circumstances where you're not required to complete continuing education. We've taken the different methods where you're earning credit and moved those to section 361. We've also struck the process for getting the written certification to complete distance learning for all 24 hours, given the fact that we're now implementing the online learning format so that someone with a physical disability could complete it through video conference, and it's no longer necessary that they attend everything in person. So we've removed that as being unnecessary at this point. So those are the changes, and we will get into those further in the discussion. There are basically 4 staff recommendations within that draft language that you've reviewed. The first of which is to rename competency area 4, which was ethics, law, and jurisprudence, as ethics, law, and professional boundaries. The purpose for that recommendation is just to provide a little bit broader of a scope for licensee learning, and it reflects the 3 main items that we see generally resulting in enforcement cases outside of the practical experience that's covered in competency areas 1 through 3. The second staff recommendation, as I mentioned, is to reduce the total number of hours that can be accepted for continuing education per day from 12 hours to 8 hours, just given the fact that trying to complete 12 hours of learning in one day becomes very difficult, especially after you get to the 6th to 8th hour. It's difficult to be able to appropriately complete that many hours within one day. Another recommendation is to grant credit for completion of the supervisory level sexual harassment prevention training that's offered by the California Department of Civil Rights or another state or federal agency. And the fourth of which is in attachment 2, is the committee had previously discussed and prepared a continuing education instructor attestation form. And within attachment 2, it's a little bit of a simpler form where we've aligned the criminal and disciplinary history questions for instructors with the grounds for denial of a license that are currently specified in statute in Business and Professions Code Section 480. We feel that that's a good solution for being able to vet the continuing education instructor and also keeping consistency with the same type of criteria that we would apply to someone that's applying for a license. So with that, and as I mentioned, the 2 other areas where we need some direction from the committee is the reapproval process for the previously approved courses, just drawing that line of what's acceptable and where it would become a new course. And second of which is at the prior meeting on October 25th, the committee had a discussion of an annual certification process. So we'd like to get a little bit more information about the vision behind that so that we can prepare that. There are a few options. It sounded like from the discussion at the last meeting, it would be through the use of some sort of form that each provider would submit with each course. We would like to offer that there's other solutions as well. We have put in the regulation language that it's the provider's responsibility to ensure that their content is relevant and up to date and that they notify the board of any changes. So we could we could mandate that through an annual requirement that they file each form, but there would be a lot of staff time involved in having to process those forms. We could also look at something where it's more of put the mandate back on the provider, and we could develop automated notifications that are customized to each provider, such as like a reminder that at every year, these are the courses we see for you and these are the expiration dates. Ensure that they're all current and relevant. If not, this is how you go about notifying the board of any changes. So there's different options to consider, but we would like a little bit more clarification on the annual certification process so we can incorporate that into this language as well. So with that, I know there's a lot of different avenues there, but I'd like to return it back to the committee for an initial discussion, either on the language or the staff recommendations.
Okay,
Can I ask a clarifying question real quick?
please.
So on the form that is if a provider or an instructor, it was that I can't remember. I looked at that form, and was it an instructor form or was it a provider form?
For purposes of, so that's the instructor's attestation form. So it's checking the instructor's background and whether they're appropriate for in being the instructor for the course.
So one of my questions is if a provider has had criminal or has had to was disciplined by their board, they have to disclose that too, correct?
That's under a separate package because that was when during the update where there's the 4 different ones, that would be for implementing it at the CE provider level and expanding that. We're beginning with the instructor because they're the ones directly there in the course.
Right. Okay. Because I think we need to address both of those, the provider and the instructor. And we're doing both of those, correct?
Currently under this language that's being reviewed today, it would be implementing that check process for at the instructor level. We could add it here if you wanted to include that for the provider, but that's where we were having challenges because at the provider level, you have an individual provider or you could have corporations, you could have institutions, and identifying the parties that are completing that was where it got complex. And that's why that was placed in the package that would be discussed down the line of expanding the provider process. But we could incorporate it.
Yeah, I understand that. I think that that's something we should incorporate because some people have their workaround where they create a corporation and kind of work around that where they don't have to necessarily disclose. And I think that we need to know who's really behind some of these provider groups, because there's providers that then have multiple instructors. And I think we need to know what the background of the provider is as well, because I think that's important. Obviously the instructor as well. So that would be one of my concerns for a future discussion. That's all I had at this point.
Okay. So Ms. Walker, Ms. Knight, feel free to jump in and keep me on track here. I think we've got a lot of points to make sure we hit here. So why don't we start with the staff language, the changes in those 4 bullet points, and just have some discussion around those. And then, renaming the competency ethics law jurisprudence as ethics law and professional boundaries. I think it's a good change. That would be my comment. Anybody else have any comments, suggestions there?
I agree.
Yeah, I do as well. I think it's great. I just made some notes about, which I think can discuss later on, of kind of making sure we have classes available and providing maybe links available to the training offered by the state and federal agency, sort of making sure we're encouraging that and making it available and not having the licensee run around like, I don't know, this one looks good, that sort of thing. So I think it's great. It reminds people of issues that have come up in the petitioner, meetings and stuff. So I just would like to have links and information easily available for the licensees so they can just grab that easily.
Is there any further comment or suggestion on the first one, the renaming the competency? Are you okay there?
Yeah, I'm okay there. Yeah.
So let's just continue that conversation then. Let's go to the third one, which was allow licensees to earn CE credit for completion of a supervisory level sexual harassment prevention training offered by a federal state agency. That's what you're referring to, like having links. And yeah, I like that suggestion. I was thinking the same thing that, one, I don't know that we've defined or that our licensees might struggle to define supervisory level if they have to search these out on their own. And so I'm wondering, Kristen, Ms. Walker, is that something we would post on our webpage, the opportunities there that we've approved of maybe in advance?
Yeah, we would post further information and a direct link actually to the California Department of Civil Rights. They have an online course that's available on demand to anyone in the public. And within the different laws, and it applies to civil service, and they've now implemented it for private employers as well. There's generally two different levels of sexual harassment prevention training. There's the training for non-supervisory employees, and then there's the supervisory level training, which is what state supervisors, managers, executives, board members all have to complete. And that's the same mandate that employers have to complete. It's a more comprehensive course because it includes additional topics. So that was the intent behind defining it. And if there's any questions, we can further implement it. But what it comes down to is there's the two types, and we've set the bar at the more comprehensive level within that language.
Well, I personally like that supervisory level because most chiropractors are in a supervisory capacity in their practices. I mean, obviously, if they're a solo practitioner, but most of them have an employee, so they're in that supervisory role. Makes perfect sense to me.
Yeah, I would just like to make sure that it was really clear for the licensees of the difference between the two, the one that we accept and, links or resources to easily find those.
Yeah, and so I think part of the discussion we may want to have then is there an opportunity for licensees to jump in and state that they feel like a course is equivalent, or let's say they find a Fed, something on a federal course and something maybe that, versus having us be a little more prescriptive about, posting. I mean, they could bring something to us for consideration of, approval, and then we could list that, because I imagine we're not going to uncover every course that might be applicable. So I'm wondering if we want to define that process, where if they bring a course to us and we approve it for any licensee, then it then essentially would go onto our list and have the pre-approved ones already defined. You can take that anytime you want. I don't know how.
I mean, I agree. I just want to make it as well easy. Like if someone goes finds one, that's great. And, we can approve it or not. But I also want to make sure that there are some that are available for people who aren't taking the time to go look for one. So I just want to make sure we have some resources. Yeah. Not that it's exclusive, just resources.
Yeah.
I think it makes the most sense that if there's already a lot of these courses, like the one that Ms. Walker or that Kristen just pointed out, that if we list those, maybe in the verbiage we just say, a board approved supervisory level, and then, put the language there that says see the website or contact them. I mean, rather than I can see it becoming a free-for-all, and I think that's what Dr. Daniels is kind of giving the insinuations that, people are going to be like, well, I found a course and I took it. And if it's something that doesn't reach that level, it can create a lot of confusion. So So I think if we have the language that says these board approved courses, and then, that if you find something else, contact the board and we'll, look at it.
Yeah.
And then add it to our list of the other ones and have the, licensees kind of help us expand the list.
Dr. Adams, can I chime in here real quick? This is Sabina.
Yes.
You raised some excellent points. I think what we will be doing, obviously, staff and everybody is taking their copious notes during this productive discussion. I think we will also be able to look to other boards and to see how they handle such a thing. And I think there's already going to be some typical language to cover these concerns. And so I know we're going to bring back this language again. So I think maybe that's an opportunity for us to look to see how other boards are handling such things. And then we'll just have to adapt their language so we can cover those concerns, because those are great points.
Okay.
Sounds good.
So we'll further develop that language. I think it sounds like in general, we approve of, allowing those courses to be approved for CE. And okay, good. Is there any other discussion on bullet point number 3 there? I'll jump back to number 2 if not.
None for me.
Okay, hearing none, getting back to number 2, which was reduce the total number of hours per day that a licensee can earn CE credit from 12 to 8 hours. And I'll open the discussion briefly. I think my biggest concern is I think sometimes we look at these hours and we just envision 12 hours, but we don't always realize that that's not the reality of the expectation that we would have. We would expect that they would get a lunch or even a dinner break in that 12-hour period, and also get maybe some other breaks. And so we're really looking at when somebody's getting credit for 12 hours of CE in a day, that their learning capacity is, really for a 14 hour day. So I think, and I know we've had, board meetings and I'm sure some of us have sat through some long CE days, but we've had board meetings that are, 8-ish hours or more. And I don't know, I just get the sense that it's simply very difficult to remain focused and maintain a mental, physical learning environment for that long. Those are my thoughts. So I support the 8 hours. I think 8 hours is,
I'll chime in here also. I'm with you on that, but at the same time, I personally liked the 12 hours at the time, and that's just because I feel like I can hang in there. If it's a subject that I love, I'll go longer than that. But I guess my feeling is that there are some that like it and some don't, and right now, when I teach, sometimes I'll have people that will come and do 8 because they just say, I can't do more than that. So they'll do like an ethics and then 6 hours of neurology, and then they're done at 8. So right now people can already kind of go 8 if they want to, or they can go 12, or they can go 2, or they can kind of pick and choose, depending on the course that's offered. And so part of me is, yeah, I agree, but at the same time, I think we're limiting that, because if somebody that travels a long way or has to spend a night in a hotel and has to do that 3 days now instead of in 2 days, or, that's if they choose to do it live, they can do their 12 live and then 12 on demand, or so that option, I think, is nice to have, that they can do up to 12 in one day. So I mean, I'm not married to one either way, but I just think that people have gotten conditioned to doing 12 in a day if they want to, or less if they want to.
I feel it's a bit over regulatory. I don't feel it's our place to tell someone how long they can learn for or think for. So I mean, if someone can do 12 hours, they can do 12 hours. As Dr. Adams is saying, a lot of people self-regulate themselves. They know if they can do 2 hours, 6 hours, 8 hours. But I don't feel like I'm in a position to say, hey, Joe can only learn for 8 hours a day. A lot of people do really well. They're in that mindset, so I'm not necessarily in favor of it. I feel like it's a bit overreaching of someone's ability to regulate themselves.
So, my counter to your good points, I think, are now that we don't. I mean, I think a lot of the travel, which maybe previously was more of a concern, but now that we can do live interactive virtual means CE for everything, I think that helps address a lot of the previous concerns we had about travel and having to spend the night and necessarily having to do face to face. At least addresses some of it. I think that when we start talking about 12 hours and the over regulating it just, to me, it begs the question, then why have any limit at all? And if we start to say that then if we're letting licensees self-regulate based on what they think their learning capacity is, I just start to go, okay, then why not let them do 16 or 18 or 20, get it all done in 24 hours? I mean, I think a licensee can make a reasonable case that if we allow that they're that type of learner that can get 18 hours in a day, And so, I mean, like, I think there, and what I'm trying to say really is just that I think there's a need to draw a reasonable line somewhere where we think that, and maybe, there's some rationale or data on this somewhere, and like the educational institutions might, have, further data on how they, define like maximum days or, et cetera. To me, I'm just using my reasonable thought that, I don't know. I just think when you put on public protection hat and you think about how much are you really getting out of, at the end of an 8, 10, 12-hour day, which physically could be now not just, 12 hours, but physically could be the 14th hour, in that day. And that, if we think about that, that would be a 7 a.m. start. And like, you're still sitting through CE at, 8:39 p.m. So it just seems unreasonable to me. But I understand the regulatory side.
I mean, I just feel like 12 hours is a good line. I mean, it would be the same as, I feel like it's similar to you telling me I can only practice for 8 hours a day because I'm only competent for 8 hours a day. I work 12, 13-hour days and I'm competent. And if I wasn't, I wouldn't do it. So I feel if we're saying you can only do 8 hours in a day, then we're saying, well, you can only practice for 8 hours a day. I mean, if you're practicing, you need to be alert, you need to be cognitive, you need to be physical. So I think 12 hours is very reasonable because people work 12-hour days. People work 14, 16-hour days, but that's much more rare. So those are my thoughts on that.
That's a good point. Thanks.
I mean, I agree with Dr. Daniels on that. I think having the option, because people can self-regulate if they can't do it. I mean, I already see that now as I'm teaching. The other thing is, it's kind of like when you say, well, if you use the regulatory argument, why have any regulation at all? Well, because we kind of have to, in a sense, just like the drinking age and smoking age and all the other stuff. 21 seems arbitrary. I mean, we can go back and forth on regulatory and what's reasonable, because some people can handle it at one age, or I don't know. You can see how it starts to get away. So I'm in the camp where I see the point, but I'm kind of in that same way that, it's like, I personally like the 12 hours, but I also see the point of what you're saying. And so I personally would be in favor of keeping it at 12. And the verbiage being up to no more than 12 hours in a given day. because then that gives people the option to do whatever they want up to that point. And I think that's reasonable.
So leave it as is, essentially.
That would be my preference. But again, I mean, I'm always going to be open to arguments, but that's where I lean towards, is giving that, having it up to that and let people self-regulate.
Yeah, it's a good discussion. Okay. Any more thoughts or discussion on that bullet point? Third one. Hearing none, let's the fourth bullet point: align the criminal and disciplinary history questions on the CE instructor attestation form with the grounds for denial of a license specified in BMP Code Section 480. I like it. I think it's a good rationale. The form looks good. I also like that the suggestion that we, if we can do the provider and instructor, maybe it's the template that we use when we get to the other form, if we can combine them. Any other thoughts?
Yeah, I agree. I like it.
Yeah, so do I.
Okay, so can I, Ms. Knight, is it okay if we make a motion regarding the changes and then go to public comment on those, and then we can come back and run through any discussion on the specific language? Ms. Walker,
Sorry. This is
go ahead.
Sabina.
Go ahead.
You don't need to make a motion right here today for this language. It is a work in progress still. Like I said before, we're definitely bringing this language back to the committee at that time. When you do have the language that's ready to be recommended to the full board, then I would definitely recommend a motion, but we don't need to have a motion today. The staff's taking their notes, and everybody is going to be updating this language with all of the concerns and from your discussion. But you can absolutely go out for public comment on everything you have discussed, and then you can do the rest of the discussion and then do public comment again.
Okay, that sounds good. Thank you for that. Moderator, can we please open?
Real quick, Chair. Yeah. Wouldn't it make more sense to get public comment after we've kind of discussed all the issues on 4? I'm just concerned about time, because I don't have a lot. I just have a couple of questions, clarification, because I think what the staff did for this whole agenda item has been nothing short of miraculous. I mean, the language I'm very much in favor of. I think they've done a fantastic job. So there's just a couple of clarification points that I have. Maybe save public comment to the end of the agenda item. That's just my suggestion. Or do we have to do public comment at each 360, 361 all the way through, or just at the end of the agenda item?
No, I was going to do it just for any public comment on the staff, the changes from the staff recommendation, and then we can go through for our discussion on all the sections. We won't do each section separately. We'll just kind of run through them and then go for public comment on the language changes for all the sections together.
Gotcha.
Yeah, is that okay?
Well, yeah, I just was wondering if we were going to just do it all. That's fine. That's great.
Yeah. I was just thinking it's a lot to combine, and we instead of coming back to the staff recommended changes later, we'll just do that now and then.
Sounds good.
Okay. Okay, moderator, if we could open it for public comment on the staff recommendations to the language changes, the 4 bullet points we just discussed.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. I've opened up the Q&A panel. If any member of the public would like to comment, please type comment using the field in the lower right-hand corner of your screen and submit it to all panelists, or you may simply raise your hand. For people who've called into the meeting, you can press *3 to raise your hand. We are displaying instructions and we'll give you a moment. And I already see we have a request from calling user 2. So you will have 3 minutes. I'll give you a 30-second warning. And calling user 2, you should be able to unmute yourself. There you go, you're unmuted.
Hi, thank you for the platform. I acknowledge the discussion and I have no comment to add. Thank you.
Thank you for that.
All right. I do not see any other requests for comment. Shall I close the Q&A panel?
Please, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. So, Ms. Walker, just framing this so we can move forward, go through each section for the board members and see if there's any comments on the sections individually, and then we'll come back to public comment for those on the total.
Yeah, I think that's a good plan. And then after we get through that, we could talk about the certification that was discussed at the last meeting. But I think it's a good idea to go through the language and field any questions from the members.
Okay. So let's start with the proposed language for Section 360, continuing education fees. Any comments, questions there?
Just one question was, it says to be determined on the, did we come up with an idea, or does the staff have a suggestion on what that fee might be for the previously approved continuing education course?
So after the discussion today, staff's going to take that back and bring a number of different proposals with a recommendation to the next meeting. We need to finalize what the framework is going to look like so that we can put an adequate estimate of staff hours involved in the process. And I would just want to note that the boundaries there is going to be a maximum of $116 per hour of instruction for course approval. So that's our cap. And then through regulation, it can be lowered and discussed at the committee level next time.
Okay. Well, I'll kick it off. I mean, I don't know. You guys covered a lot of ground, I have to say. So kudos to you, Ms. Walker, on you and your staff and putting. I mean, I think that when I look at the competencies, I mean, you, as far as I'm concerned, you covered a lot of. You made it broad enough and not too granular, so that I think it gives good direction on descriptions of all those things. And I mean, all the way through, I think it looks really, really good. I guess I don't know where we want to, but there's a couple of questions that I had relative to, like, when we get into the additional things. I love the idea of having the philosophy there. There was one that said number 4 on page 5. 4 that is now titled C, Diagnostic Testing Procedures, Interpretation, and Technologies that Aid in Differential Diagnosis. I think that might be redundant, because that would fall under, I think, competency 1 of evaluation and management. But I like all the other options. I think it gives a broad enough and open enough under competency 5 for elective. I was thinking that we might be a little bit specific, or I found J, principles of practice, to kind of be vague. So I don't know if we want to either, leave that under wellness or that type of thing, or because you got wellness right underneath it, prevention, health, maintenance. But principles of practice, I thought that might be could be classified as vague, might be tough for staff. And then the rehabilitation, maybe specify like spinal, body, extremities rehabilitation. And then public health. Is that where you were thinking of research? Was that what you had in mind of? Is that, like epidemiology studies on public health and that kind of aspect? Is that what you meant by M, public health?
With that, so with those specific items, that's the current language that's already in the regulation. We can add additional examples to provide more clarity to those, not only staff, but then the providers that are submitting the applications. With public health right now, it's pretty broad, and it covers a variety of different discussion or course topics.
Okay, so would it be helpful going forward for us to, as board members, give more specificity for the new language, or just leave it broad like that?
That's a call that the committee can make. The intent behind competency area 5 is to be very encompassing and to really provide flexibility for providers to be able to offer courses. And that's where the language there, where it's being defined as, it has to be related to, let me pull it back up. Got too many screens open at once. Where it has to be general education topics related to the current knowledge, skills, and abilities necessary for competent practice of chiropractic in California. So that's the description of the competency area. And then within there, just to provide some guidance, we've included the categories that have been previously accepted by the board in the past. We can add to that list, and we can also further clarify any of those terms that are being used, so that we provide additional clarification. But really, what this is doing is implementing a very broad category that staff can much more easily process applications, because we're focusing on the content and whether it meets that need of current knowledge, skills, and abilities for competent practice, rather than spending time clarifying whether something's a diagnostic procedure or principle of practice or public health. We would just brand those all as competency area 5.
Okay. Yeah. So I think that we had discussed as a committee, I don't know, maybe last year, was, and I think it was Dr. Paris that brought it up, is that having, as part of that, that research and, reviewing epidemiological studies, that kind of stuff, and so that probably would fall under that category as a loose. So anyway, those are a couple of comments that I had on that part of the agenda 361. Which I think you guys did a marvelous job, and helping with the definitions of all the competencies, I think gives great direction to the providers on what would be a part of that competency. So I like the language, and just a couple of those comments that I had about the competency 5. So that's all I had about 361. I really commend you for your work and your staff's work.
Dr. Paris?
Yes.
I'm wondering if we could, because I do have some questions and comments, and there's a lot here. I'm wondering if we could just sort of go by page number, like starting on page 2, and then kind of just quickly work through those page numbers, as far as just to make it a little more streamlined for my little brain as far as the questions. And would that be okay?
Yeah. So we're on page 1 now. I know we've jumped forward a bit, right? So is anything else on page 1? And then we can go to page 2.
Yeah, I have nothing on page 1 or page 2.
Dr. Adams?
No, I pointed out what my things were. I guess maybe I took it out of order, but that's fine. Let's go to, I have nothing on page 1, 2, 3, or 4, other than the 12 hours, which we've already addressed. So I'm ready to jump to wherever Dr. Daniels wants to jump. Or you.
I have nothing. I agree with everything you said too. This is a heavy left. So
it's just me. So on page 3,
yes,
could be a question, and maybe I'm not understanding it, but the basic life support certification, I feel that it was under, you guys have it under competency 5, so electives. However, it does involve assessment, evaluation, and management, and risk management, and also emergency procedures. And so for me, when I look at it, maybe I'm misunderstanding that number 2, I feel like could really cross over into competency 1. And so I don't know if people are doing that, I feel like that is really part of competency 1. It could be either. And I don't know what the thoughts are on putting it under the elective.
Yeah, my thought is the reason why we wouldn't would be that the evaluation and management would be mainly to focus on, cases typically seen in a chiropractic office versus, the BLS being an emergency kind of situation and unique unto itself. CPR BLS being unique to kind of a more important but rare situation. And it would essentially, in my view, take away the mandated hours. Because you could do 2 a year. I think one of those is a 1-year renewal. And so you could take 2 hours a year away from the core of the evaluation and management subtopics, doing, like the emergency procedure, which may be really rare and valuable and important, but not something that wouldn't be inclusive of that, something you'd expect or might be typically present to a chiropractic office. That would be my rationale. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I was thinking more of, we've had cases come before us where there's been an emergency in the office and the board has perhaps felt that it was not handled appropriately. And in dealing with patients who potentially are geriatric or old or have swallowing difficulties, et cetera, I feel like the practice may be less rare where that could occur. So I guess that's kind of how I was thinking of it, and sort of emphasizing or enhancing sort of the clinicians and the licensees' awareness and ability to respond to an emergency, even if it's saying not giving CPR, but seeing stroke-like signs, et cetera. Because, I take the class every 2 years for my sports certification, and it is a constant reminder of kind of assessment and what you're looking for. So I guess that was my thoughts on that.
Yeah.
And then the other question I had was on the sexual harassment. Is that not a crossover with the competency 4 as far as the professional boundaries, instead of being, I see it as being either an elective but I feel like it should be part of 4 if it's sexual harassment, because we redefined it for professional boundaries, which I thought we were including as sexual harassment and sexual harassment training. Am I misunderstanding that?
If I could clarify, actually both points. I'll start with the sexual harassment. So there's competency area 4, where if a board-approved provider or a PACE provider was offering a course that was covering the topic of sexual harassment, it would be approved by the board and you would get credit under competency area 4. With the sexual harassment prevention training that's specifically called out under that separate section for different activities that you can use to receive credit, that's if you took the course directly through a state or government agency, and that wouldn't have been pre-approved by the board, because we don't grant approval. Like, we don't have an application process to grant approval under competency area 4 for that course. It's just another method of obtaining credit for that activity. So that's how it's currently structured. We could recognize that under competency area 4 and not have an application process if you completed the California Civil Rights course. That is an option we can discuss. And then for the basic life support certification, it's the same structure where a lot of those topics would be included under competency area 1, but the purpose of having that language called out separately as another activity rather than a CE course through the board, but that's another activity that you could receive credit through. That's designed to align with the other regulation that the board will be discussing about mandating the BLS or CPR certification as a condition of licensure. It would be adding that so that the licensees could get credit for those hours. So it's outside of CE, but it's another license requirement that's been discussed by the board.
So having said that, you're saying that if somebody does complete an approved course, that they could realistically use it, sexual harassment for competency 4, even though it's listed as under competency 5, you would allow that to cover portions of the competency 1 for the BLS, and then sexual harassment for competency 4?
If I could clarify the structure just a bit, because we've kind of broadened within this regulation, we've broadened what counts for CE. So you have to have 24 hours of CE credit. And then within subdivision C, the board's outlined, or the committee's outlined, the 4 areas that are mandatory courses where you must earn those hours of credit directly through the board, through board approved courses in those competency areas. And then the boards or the committee's also discussed having a 5th competency area for board approved courses labeled as competency 5 electives. And then on top of that, outside of the 5 competency areas that the board is reviewing and approving through the course approval process, there's a number of other activities that licensees can complete to earn CE credit. And that's where that more list comes into play. So the BLS or the sexual harassment training through the Civil Rights Department, attending a board meeting, all those other activities, those are outside of the board's approval process, but recognized for credit towards that 24-hour requirement.
I got you. So they're still going to have to do their minimum of the 10 mandated, and these other areas may be mandatory, but they would count towards your total of the 24 is what you're saying.
Correct. Under this current structure, they would count towards the 24-hour annual requirement, but they would not count towards the mandatory requirements for competencies 1 through 4.
I think that makes sense.
So I get that, but I'm still kind of fascinating about number 3 as far as why that. I mean, I thought we had a discussion on competency 4, the ethics, law, and jurisprudence, and we talked about sexual harassment, and we talked about what was approved as far as training offered by the state and federal agencies. So I'm still a little confused as to why number 3 on page 3 is under the elective and not able to comply with either competency number 4 or an elective.
Yeah, I would support that contention that we develop the language so that it's clear that CE completed under 3 is eligible for, as the mandated 2 hours for ethics, law, and professional boundaries. I think that makes sense.
So my only concern is that we are, we could run into somebody just doing a sexual harassment course every year, which I'm not saying is bad, but then they're not going to be exposed to other ethical issues and law issues. And I think it all matters.
But we don't really, currently, we don't really track what they do year to year.
Yeah.
I think the assurance that we have there too, I mean, maybe it's, I don't want to call it a higher level, but I think the assurances that we have is that the language includes that it's a supervisory level course, and then secondarily that it's, provided by the California Department of Civil Rights or another state or federal government agency. So, I mean, I think, it gives us some assurances that even if they repeat it, it's there's likely to be potentially some quality there.
I mean, we need to repeat it, so.
Yeah.
So
I agree. I mean, okay, I'm cool with whatever.
And getting back to the CPR question, I don't, Dr. Daniels, I don't know if that helps with your concern, but that, the forward thinking that, mandating CPR, and then, that at least we should, clarify that that's eligible for continuing education credit.
Yeah, I mean, if it becomes a mandate, then I see not including it. If it's not a mandate, I see that someone should be able to, because it does, for me, feed into diagnostic evaluation and management. So, I mean, those are just my thoughts. I mean, if it's a competency that's mandated, then yeah, it shouldn't count. But if we don't come up with that, then I think having it be either an elective or one, to me, would encourage people to actually do it. But I get what you're saying. Thanks.
Yeah.
I think the idea behind the 4 main competencies was they were core things to chiropractic practice. And I'm not saying that BLS is not core, but as you pointed out, I mean, I've been in practice 27 years, and knock on wood, I haven't had to use my CPR skills at all ever in my practice. And I hope to never do that, but it is a rare thing. Whereas the other 4 competencies I'm dealing with every day. So I think that to Dr. Paris's point is that I guess the spirit of the idea of competency 1 was, the interaction and practice with patients. But, I think CPR is 2 years certification, correct? So.
I think I don't know, the ASHI might have done in the past a 1 year. Yeah.
Currently, the BLS is every 2 years.
That's what I recall.
Yeah, I mean, I do it every 2 years, so.
Yeah. Okay, any other discussion on page 3 or 4? I think we discussed the 8 versus 12 hours previously.
I had on 4, I had a question on, I was just wondering if there was possible overlap and provider confusion between competency 1 and competency 2.
Well, because the statement about record keeping and evaluation management?
Yes. And I just want to make sure, I mean, it looks fine to me, but I put myself in the provider's shoes, and I know it's come up as far as a concern about not being clear of what fits into what category. So it may be nothing, that was just wanted to sort of see if there was overlap or confusion for the provider, or if it's clear.
Well, it was clear to me. I see your point.
Yeah.
I mean, we can't anticipate there's some providers that are going to get caught in the weeds, and hopefully we can, have enough time with staff to help that not be an issue for staff.
Yeah, I mean, I'm fine with it. It was just a thought that came up as I was reading it.
Yeah, I see that.
And then the kind of the same on page 5, it was competency 4. It says mandatory reporting requirements, and I didn't know if there was a crossover with competency 2, documentation, record keeping, and coding. So, I mean, it may be too much in the weeds, but I know other questions have come up as far as what belongs in what. So I'm not attached to it at all. It's just a question.
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I think maybe part of it is, for me, was that we're using the language that the competency area is defined as, and I didn't know if maybe we need a statement in there that clarifies that examples of competency in the area are those, and something that it's not limited to just, the examples we've used. So maybe adding a little flexibility. It seems prescriptive the way it's written.
Yeah, I see that there's going to be. I mean, there always is a little. It's like the issue about technique, right? We have anatomy and physiology and neurology as a competency 5, but we obviously, if we're doing technique, which is mandatory, you're going to have to discuss anatomy, physiology, and musculoskeletal aspects when you're talking about technique. So there is crossover in that regard. And I think that's just where we have to spend that time with the staff, helping them, not get hung up on that, and realize that, there are portions of these companies that are going to have some overlap, and to not get too granular, not to take your word, David, because I know you like that word, but not get too granular with things where we spend hours and hours and hours, or denying courses because of that. I think that's where we need to come in and spend some time with the staff and helping them when applications come in to separate. Okay, here's, like, I had the question come up about, contrast with an MRI. And I got asked the question when I was first on the board about, well, we don't break the skin, so we denied the course. And I said, well, they're not talking about breaking the skin. They're talking about reading an MRI with or without contrast. That's something chiropractors do all the time. But the staff kind of was concerned about that particular point. And so that's where we can kind of come in and say, no, they're not talking about breaking the skin and doing an IV. They're talking about IV contrast. And that was just a clarification point. So,
well, that's what I was kind of referring to as far as I don't want them getting stuck, because to me, you can, what you're talking about, I think can happen. So I just feel as long as we're going to come in and make it easier versus them, debating over it with not having the background.
And I think that's where we have to come in as the board, is that to try to anticipate all those things is going to be difficult in writing. But I think this does a good job. And where we can step in is helping the staff, separate out some of those things, so that when those applications finally start coming in and the competencies start getting delineated out over the course of the next couple of years, that we can assist in that process. That's my feeling, because I think that's part of our role, is to help them as well.
And then go ahead. I was going to move us to page 5 and forward.
Does anyone else see that number C, though, as being perhaps an overlap? I think that because of potential overlap too. Diagnostic testing procedures, interpretation technology that aid in the differential diagnosis of all conditions that affect the human body. I think that could fall under evaluation and management.
Well, I think it provides for maybe a separate area for diagnostic imaging.
Yeah, I agreed on that.
And
we might specify that. We might specify that.
Yeah. And I mean, imaging is maybe just one of the testing procedures. Like, there might be others out there that, would be inclusive under that. But we probably should consider language that clarifies diagnostic imaging and testing procedures. And, maybe clarifying, the diagnostic imaging part of it. And then also that there's other testing procedures too. So
I guess my thought on that is that if you're in the process of directing or managing a patient's care, so are you saying, rather than you're saying that under the competency 1, it would be a suggestion of saying an NCV or an EMG study, that might be the direction of the evaluation management of the patient, but the discussion about EMGs, NCVs, MRIs, CAT scans would be under competency 5.
Yeah, I think knowing the order and knowing what they are,
okay,
are maybe 2 separate topic areas.
Right. All right, I'll go with that.
Dr. Paris, before we move on from page 4, just for clarification purposes, because we are talking about a little bit of overlap, and I will say that within the competencies from the staff level, it's pretty clear where something would fall, just because the titles of the competencies and kind of the focus are very clear to us. We don't have major concerns with overlap. I did want to point out, though, in competency 1, the way it's currently drafted, that competency area is defined as instruction in the components of evaluation and management services for new and established patients. Then we have the language that says including, and we've listed out all the components. Now, we could keep it that way or stop the definition at the point of instruction in the components of evaluation and management services of new and established patients, and then use all of those other as examples of courses. It's just going to depend on if the committee's intention there is that an approved course in evaluation and management, should it be encompassing all of the components, or is it appropriate for a licensee to complete a course that's maybe focused on just one component? Would that qualify? Because that's where it diverges from competency 2, where we have the definition and then we have examples. In competency 1, we simply have an example with multiple components included. So right now, mandatory, or it could be worded to just define the competency and allow for multiple different subject areas to fall within that competency.
So that brings up a point that I remember back when Dion and I, the first meeting I was at with Dion, that's the question I had. And I think that's a great point, because the impression that I got from that discussion back then was that it was broad enough that some people may want to just spend time on the evaluation part. And some may want to include evaluation and management part. And like the record keeping, they may want to spend a lot of time on just the record keeping, aspect instead of EMR or, other branches they could go. So I see what you're saying with that, people could kind of cherry pick or pick and choose certain things. And I think that that's in the spirit of what we're trying to say, is that that's what I get at, is rather than it has to be all inclusive, they could focus on certain aspects of that competency. Is that, yeah.
Yeah, I didn't read it that way. I mean, I like the language actually, because it ticks really all the boxes that we talk about with petitioner meetings. Like, I mean, to me, this is really important that, maybe a class isn't going to have everything, but it is that flow of intake, history, diagnosis, evaluation, management, follow through, which are all the things that we have issue with. So, I personally, I like the language. And then if someone wants to focus on MRI imaging and all that, it's the elective. But I feel if we strip that away, we lose the intent of what we mean by competency one. So, and unless I'm misunderstanding, but when I read that, I feel like it's more encompassing than we've had, which I think is what we need. That is what you are billing for when you do an EM code, is you need to have all these aspects to it. And we've seen deficiencies in that in our licensees. So I'm sure.
Yeah, I concur.
So let me clarify. So if somebody was to present a course in competency 1 and it was covering physical examination of cervical spine, say it was for an hour or 2, that would be eligible? Are you saying that it should cover all the courses, should cover all the aspects, or?
Is that to me?
Yeah, I'm just asking the group. I was hearing maybe that, like, we were saying that the courses would have to cover the full, definition of the competency area, or, because you could reasonably fill an hour or 2 just doing physical exam.
Oh, yeah. I wasn't saying, they have to tick every single box. I was just saying I like how it's written, because it gives to me more the intent of it versus just the statement at the beginning. If you do a class on cervical spine, you still have to take a history, you still have to do an exam, you're probably going to have imaging, you're probably going to have some level of treatment. So yeah, no, I'm not saying like the class has to have each one. And if that's what this means, then that is exclusionary. But I feel when Ms. Walker read it and she stopped at established patients, that I felt like the intent of what this was meant to be, which is I thought what you were intending with evaluation and management, is that it was more comprehensive, whatever body part you're working on, or physical, or.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm with you. I didn't think it was that they had to tick every box, but and I fully expect that we're going to get some questions from providers, and they're going to throw stuff at, and we're going to say, hey, just look at the spirit of what we're trying to do here. And I think there's going to be some growing pains with it, because there always is in the beginning. And I think that's where we can do some hand holding and doing some work with the staff, so that we can minimize as much as we can, as much work for them as we can. I mean, it seems easy for us because we do this every day, but for staff that's not doing it every day, I can see that. I see how that could be a little bit of a, so, but I really like the wording of all of these. I think it was really well done. So again, kudos.
Ms. Walker, is that good for number 4? Can we, or from that section, can we move on?
Yeah, we can move on. We'll make sure that the language isn't, that it reflects the committee's intention there, that it's covering the different components, but that it doesn't have to check each and every box. So we'll make sure that we make any necessary adjustments.
Is that where that include but not limited to where verbiage comes in?
That's where it would benefit us, yeah, when we do an updated draft, because right now it just simply has including with a list and the word and, which requires that each and every one of those components be included. But we have some flexibility there on the language to be a little bit more flexible.
Right.
And we can look at some language around C and including diagnostic imaging and testing procedures. And I assume that would include labs also, you know, so like maybe we can have some language that includes those 2 major components.
Good point. Good point.
Okay. Can we go to 6, 7, etc.? Is everyone okay?
Yeah, I'm good. I don't have questions till page 8.
Okay. So the only question I have is on 6. If I guess we could bring back some definition clarification of principles of practice. And if there are none that don't seem like overlap, maybe we can eliminate that.
Yeah, that was vague to me. I pointed that out.
Think of what that is that we don't already have included. This is pretty comprehensive.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I had
We'll make adjustments.
Okay. And then on rehabilitation and public health, I think we should just define those further with some examples. Okay.
Yeah, I just put in there like spinal, brain, extremities.
Yeah.
You know, something like that.
Yeah.
And then the public health, I was thinking, I mentioned earlier, you know, maybe like talking about research or epidemiology, that type of stuff.
Yeah, I think I think we might want to separate like the aspects, components of public health, separate from, you know, like emerging research and research design and evaluation, and you know, like, because that's a whole separate topic. You know, and events like, as an example, like ACC RAC or like the scientific conferences, those types of things where they're doing, you know, research, you know, all just emerging research and papers and case studies and things like that. I think we need a separate area that identifies that that's eligible.
Okay.
You know, I think it's separate from topics in public health, which may include research, of course, like epidemiologic research, as you mentioned, but not necessarily. I mean, you still could be reviewing, you know, United States Preventative Services Task Force guidelines and you know, how do you screen for AAAs or,
right,
you know, et cetera. So I think I would like to see maybe an extra, just defining the, you know, research subject matter there is eligible.
I like it.
Along those lines, I did have actually a comment or a question. I mean, as far as, you know, chiropractic is quite deficient in research, and promoting that would be, I think, helpful. So having research as a separate category, if somebody is conducting a research study, can they get credit for their hours? But that, to me, opens up a bag of worms. Like, you know, it has to be an approved study from an IRB, and, you know, like, then we would have to define, I think, what that means. But to me, it might be worth a conversation because we are lacking in that area.
I think maybe not under this number 4 where we're at on the agenda, but for like new, you know, new business or a new agenda item, that might be a good suggestion. I think that would be very valuable. Anything else here, or can we go to 8?
I'm ready.
Dr. Daniels, did you say you had something on 8?
Yeah, I just, I could be reading it wrong. It just, like the 4th paragraph down, it says, applications for approval shall be submitted to the board office at least 30 days prior to a scheduled board meeting. Providers with applications that are incomplete will be notified of the deficiencies in writing within 3 weeks from the date of the receipt. Like we received one that was deficient that Dr. Adams picked up. It didn't have I don't remember, Dr. Adams, what was on there, but it was missing some information. And so we have timeframes on there, and I'm not sure that really fell in that time frame. So I just don't want people to get into a pickle on the timing of that, or because the board received it, and I think that was more than 3 weeks after receipt, but I'm not sure.
That's a good catch, and I would suggest that since we are talking about notifying of deficiency, we may even want to align it with what's in the CE course section, where we say that we'll notify them within 15 days of any deficiency. And in that case, the one that went to the board should have been notified of the deficiency, not brought forward on the application or to the board meeting. So we could align it with the same timeframes that we've identified for deficient course applications, and that would also, by issuing that another week sooner, allow them to potentially fix the deficiency and us still put it on the board meeting agenda without further delay.
Yeah, I think that would be great if it tidies that up a little bit. And then my last question was at the bottom of the page, number 2, it said, provide a course roster to the board within 30 days upon request. Is there, I'm sure there is, but what's the reasoning behind not just having the rosters submitted and that we have to request it?
That's existing language, and what it does is requires that providers maintain their records, and then in the case of an audit or if there's any types of questions about a course, it gives the board the authority to request those records and receive them. And it's a requirement that the provider maintain the records, but then if the board has a need for reviewing, it establishes the process for us to obtain them.
Okay, so it's not like with the initial. Do we get a roster with the initial application?
No, we don't get the rosters. That's maintaining the rosters of attendees at courses.
Got you.
And they have to maintain those records for 4 years. So where it's particularly helpful is if we ever have an instance where we think that someone's created a fraudulent certificate, the providers have the records and we can verify it ourselves.
Yeah, okay, I got it. Thank you.
Anything else on 8 or 9?
I have one on 9. I guess it's already been in the regulations because there's no lines or underlining, but number 6, it says provide a certificate of completions to licensees within 30 days following completion of the course. Can we shorten that? Shouldn't they get a certificate much quicker than that? Particularly for some people that are waiting to the last minute.
Yeah, I think it's a good suggestion.
I mean, when I teach a course, the certificate is generated that day.
Well, what's your suggestion for a time frame?
Well, I was thinking like within 5 days, or at least maybe 10 days to allow for snail mail. Some people are still doing it through snail mail, but I would think that a provider should have that, every time I've taught, I've always given the certificate either the day of by hand, or it was generated via the taking of a test. And when they pass it, the certificate's immediately uploaded to their email.
I agree with Dr. Adams, but I do think like we maybe should be, emergencies happen, computers crash, people get sick, like, I don't know, maybe like maybe not 30 days, but a little bit of leeway just in case, something goes sideways.
10 days? I don't know what does staff think. I mean, I guess, I mean, since it's been that way for a long time, I guess it's not an issue. I just thought, why was it taking so long? I don't want to spend a lot of time on it. I just was pointing it out that I thought that providers should be giving that a lot sooner than 30 days.
We could go either way on that. We could implement the change here. I do want to note that although we are making some edits here to section 362 about the CE providers, the intent is to be able to kind of expeditiously put forward the new CE requirements for licensees and then also the new course approval schedule. There is another package that would be behind this one where we would be asking the committee to finish its work on updates to the CE provider program. So we could discuss some of those in more detail when we get to that stage as well.
Okay. That was my 2 cents. Again, it's not a big deal. If it's easier to get this process through to leave it the way it is, then I'm fine with that too. But I just think that there's a better standard than 30 days. In my experience, anyway, I get the certificate immediately. So I'm good on page 9.
Okay. Page 10 or 11. I really like that we defined, I think the definitions are perfect, easily understandable. On 10, the in-person learning experience, live and interactive via electronic means, and distance learning being asynchronous. So I really like that. I don't have any comment or suggestion there. Anybody else on 10?
No.
On 11?
No.
Hearing none. If we go to, how about 12 or 13?
Nope, I didn't have any.
Yeah, me either. I like the language there. 14 or 15?
I didn't have any other issues with anything else. I just think it's great, and I'm excited that how far we've come.
Yeah, I don't have any more to page 17, so I'm good.
Okay. And I am also, I'm good there. I have nothing else. Anything else from staff?
Oh, you know what? I apologize. I just had one thing real quick on a course may not consist of more than one competency areas as defined. So are we saying that if somebody, say, did a 2-hour seminar and 1 hour, well, you know what? I retract that. It all looks great. I don't need to create any more problems.
What page are you on?
I was on page 10 where it said a course may not consist. I was thinking course versus program.
Oh, Lord.
And we've had that conversation before about, a course, like, 2 hours of ethics, and then that would be one course. So that would be the competency there. But I was thinking about these more large type things, like, big convention type things, like CCA conventions and stuff like that, where they're doing, or the Wave, where they're doing, multiple tracks with multiple this, and thinking about all the different competencies. And I guess I just immediately think of the staff as, how perplexing that can be. Because I remember reviewing one 30-hour program, helping the staff about 1.5 years ago. And I mean, it took me a long time to go through it. So I just think about, but I answered my own question, and I'll leave it at that. So looks good to me. It's all going to come out in the wash, right?
So from here, where staff needs some additional direction is for the reapproval of a course, really drawing the line of what's acceptable for reapproving a course versus what would be a structural change that would require a new course application, specifically with content, because we get a lot of where they've established an outline and they're going to cover certain content, but they call it maybe a case study, and the case studies regularly change, or the content within the actual course regularly changes. So if we could just get a little guidance on where that line is. And then at the last committee meeting, there was the idea thrown out of annual certification process for the CE providers, that they're on at least on an annual basis certifying that the content is still relevant, up to date, and they haven't made any changes to the course. If we wanted to implement something like that, or if we wanted to handle that more on just in the regulations stating it's a requirement that they do that, and that staff send reminders to encourage compliance, kind of drawing both of those lines. Those are the last two items that we have for this language.
I've had some discussions with some providers, and full disclosure, I've had a conversation with Marcus Strutz, and I think, you know, the point that, and I read his you know, whatever, a while back, his comments about different things, and I think one of the things that come up is the difference between an outline and then updating material that is consistent with that outline. And I see that point, and I think that that's something that can be considered, because if an outline is, for instance, like wellness, and the principles of wellness, the 5 principles of health per se, continue to, you know, they don't really change in a sense. Those principles of health continue to be the same, but there's new studies, there's new information, there's new surveys that are out there that relate to wellness, or different concepts of diets, or, you know, different things that come out. I see both sides of it. That is that, you know, we want to know that information is being relevant and updated, and the idea behind the 3 years. But then the principle of you know, they're talking, you know, when they talk about, well, that it's the same outline. Of course we're going to update case studies, and there's going to be new research, so it doesn't change the content appreciably, other than being more updated. So looking at that, you know, perhaps we think in terms of a course like that being something that would be more subject to an attestation that the content or the outline staying the same, but updated information, and then a fee that's commensurate with just, you know, that, looking at that, rather than having to go into the details of a whole new competency or a whole new course like we're going to be dealing with over the course of the next couple of years. So that's my 2 cents on that.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that was the general idea, that they would be able, I mean, we would encourage them to keep the course content current and updated, and that doesn't necessarily have to change, you know, the outline, or, you know, it's still the same subject matter, just more current than it was last year or 3 years ago, et cetera.
And I think the question was, with our new implementation of courses approved for 3 years, do they have to repay the full fee at the 3-year, or at the 4th year, or do they have a different fee as they attest to that course?
Right.
You know, that was the question, was, do they repay the $116 per hour for 6 or 12 hours, or is it a different fee? And that may be the thing that we're talking about, that's to be determined, that we talked about early on.
So my thoughts are that, I mean, the objective and the outlines can be the same, but I think somewhere on the application, there needs to be some declaration and documentation showing that new information has been provided, because I don't think that we can guarantee that there's some great providers, but I don't think we can guarantee, if we're talking about public safety and the education of the licensees, we have no guarantee that that information is being updated. So if we're in that regard, I feel like we need some level of documentation, not to make it difficult, but the objective and the outcome they outline can be the same, but there needs to be something attached for me that has a brief description, or the studies that are included. It's very easy to do. If you have EndNote and Word, you just click a button and it fills it in for you, and the research is there, it's highlighted. And then the fee would not be a full review fee, but it would just be some prorated fee as far as just the time it takes to review the new information. So, I mean, wellness stays the same, but the information changes. And I think over 3 years, if the same exact thing, we don't know that information has been updated. And I feel like that is very much towards public safety. So not to be punitive to the providers, but we also have to make sure that every provider is doing it. So, I mean, that's kind of how I see it. And I think within the 3 years, just, fill out a form. I love Miss Walker's thing, give them a reminder. And if it's, year one, just, yes, it's the same, there's no fee, send it in, I'm doing the same thing. And then at the 3-year mark, there needs to be something that is different, but I don't think they should be paying, for a full review, because a lot of it will stay the same. Those are kind of my thoughts on that.
I concur completely and totally. And I think that's the spirit of the idea.
Ms. Walker, does that give staff direction? Is that enough discussion?
That's helpful for the reapproval process. And sorry to belabor the point, but if we could just clarify on the annual certification, is it the committee's intent that annually the providers submit a form for each course with a certification, or do the certification and the update and the review at the 3-year mark when they apply for reapproval with, at least annual reminders in between, just reminding them that it's their responsibility to ensure that their content is up to date, that all course dates have been filed with the board, just outlining all the requirements as a reminder that, hey, if you've made any changes to these, you need to file them with us? Or do we want to formally collect a form every year and then do a 3-year reapproval?
I think the reminder is sufficient.
I do too. Yeah, I like the reminder idea, and then at that 4th year, so they've approved for 3 years, so year 4 they would be submitting an actual attestation at that point, which would be a formal form that states, the outline has stayed the same, but here are the substantive changes that we've made, or new studies, and provide that information, which should be easily provided. I mean, all they really have to do is they could literally print out a copy of the slide if they have a PowerPoint updating the slide that they have, and just submit that with their packet, and the staff can look at it and say, okay, that seems a reasonable thing to do.
And then the fee, Dr. Adams, would just be whatever that staff time is to reapprove or relook at the new documentation provided. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think, $100, I mean, I don't know. Is it an hour, $116? Does it take an hour, or what's it take? Is it a half hour? The staff can determine that and say, okay, a reasonable fee is, 45 minutes or an hour for staff, then it's $116 or whatever the staff recommends. I mean, I'm just throwing a number out there because that's our new fee, is $116 an hour.
The other question was the application for, say they teach it in 3 different venues. They teach it live, they teach it in person, live interactive, and then they also provide it on demand. Would that be 3 applications or just 1 application, and you just check the box as far as if it's just live or you can check all 3 boxes. What's the thought around that?
The intention from staff is that during the application process, the provider outlines the learning formats that they intend to provide the course, and that what it's for tracking purposes and our application of for auditing, the design behind it would be that someone files a single application and they would identify which learning formats they plan to offer the course. They would provide sufficient documentation to meet the different requirements depending on the type of learning format. And then in the end result, when staff issues an approval number, they would get unique approval numbers for each of the learning formats so that we can tell by looking at the approval number which format it is. But it would be one application process, and they would just explain their intent behind the different learning formats.
And the one fee associated with the one application process, correct?
Correct. The one fee associated with the staff review.
Okay.
So just for my clarification, so if they did say a wellness course that they were providing distance learning or would be taught live or in person, they would pay one fee and they could check a box that says the information and then satisfy the requirements of the staff that the proper procedures for, attendance reporting and all the other stuff, that they satisfy all that, they would get that one application approved for 3 or 2 or 1 medium of learning and pay the one fee?
Correct. That's the intention. If a provider is going to offer a course and then record it and place it on the website for distance learning, they would file one application. They would make it clear in the application that they're pursuing those 2 learning formats, or 3 if it's a hybrid, whatever is appropriate for the learning. And then at the staff level, we'll review it and then we'll issue out approval numbers as necessary so that it reflects the learning format within that approval number. But from the provider's perspective, they just need to provide a clear application and explain their intent. They don't need to file multiple applications for the same content.
I think that's great. Well, I'm excited. Great job. I mean, I almost got chills here. I'm thinking about how long this has been coming. This is really exciting. Great job. I'm moved by how fast the staff, you guys just really, as far as I'm concerned, hit a home run with this packet today. This is really great.
I do have one more question.
Okay.
Sorry.
I'm just kidding.
I had it under future agenda items. But I was just wondering if we can have the conversation now or if it's a future agenda item to deal with the live interactive requirements for attendance and kind of the being able to see the attendee, the camera on, and what are those requirements so that it's clear for the providers and that it's that we can guarantee that the person is actually there. So I don't know if that's a discussion for here or for future agenda.
I would suggest future agenda. I think there's a lot to discuss there. Yeah.
I agree, and the concern I have is with that is that going to hold us up from moving this forward? Kristen?
My apologies. I was trying to scroll because it's addressed a little bit there in the language, and we could beef it up if that's the committee's intention. If we make too many modifications, it could slow us up, but we do have that meeting coming up in January as well. So staff can gather additional information on ensuring appropriate interaction and attendance during a virtual course and present ideas back to the committee at that meeting so that we can incorporate it into this language.
Is it safe to say that we've kicked the can a long way down the field and that at the next meeting we probably could spend a substantive amount of time on that issue? Because I have some good ideas about that attendance idea. I mean, they're not perfect because I mean, technology is such, but is that fair to say that we could spend a substantive amount of time in January on that one part? Because I think we've kicked the can a long way here.
Yeah, I believe that would be correct. At the January meeting, the main item for discussion at that point is the fees. And then if the committee could also discuss attendance and verification of participation as well so that it can be incorporated here.
Great.
Do we need any further discussion on this agenda item?
No, I know your time is short, so I'm satisfied.
None for me.
Ms. Walker, anything from staff? Anything else on this agenda item?
No, I think we have plenty here to work on and bring back some additional kind of updates and recommendations at the next meeting. So I'd say we're all set besides public comment.
And I don't believe we need a motion for anything that we've discussed here. It was all
no. We've taken notes. Yeah.
Okay. And so let me ask the moderator. Could you please open agenda item number 4 for public comment?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm opening up the Q&A panel. If any member of the public would like to make a comment, please type comment using the field in the lower right-hand corner of your screen and submit it to all panelists. Or you may simply raise your hand. If you've called in, you can press *3 to raise your hand. We are displaying instructions and we'll give you a moment. All right, we have a request for comment from call-in user number 2, and call-in user number 2, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Discussion acknowledged, and thank you for including the public in this discussion.
Okay, thank you. And I see no further requests for comment. Would you like me to go ahead and close the Q&A panel? All right, I just closed it.
Apologies, I couldn't come off mute there. Okay. Let's see. Moving to agenda item number 6. Future agenda items.
I think we meant, was that last one the public comment for items not on the agenda, or was that public comment on the last of the discussion? I think we might have missed public comment for items not on the agenda.
No, yeah, you're correct.
Okay.
Didn't we? Sorry, I skipped one. Back to agenda item number 5. Apologies.
All right, I will open up the Q&A panel for comments on items not on the agenda. And again, if you'd like to make a comment, please type comment using the field in the lower right-hand corner of the screen and submit it to all panelists, or you may simply raise your hand. And again, this is public comment for items not on the agenda. And I do not see any requests for comment. Shall I close the Q&A panel?
Yes, please. Thank you. Thanks for catching that, Ms. Knight and everyone. Okay. Moving to agenda item number 6, future agenda items. I think Dr. Daniels, you had some previous discussion on potential future agenda items.
Yeah, I had a couple.
I think we may have lost her briefly.
This is the moderator. She shows us still logged in, but her audio is showing that it's not connected. So she might want to call in for her audio, and that would just be a matter of going up to the top of the screen, clicking on audio and video, and doing a call-in option for her audio. And thank you, co-moderator for displaying the instructions.
Hi, Dr. Daniels, we lost you there for a minute. So if you started, go ahead and please just start over there.
That's ironic. Okay. So I would like to put on the agenda for next time discussing research, people doing research in chiropractic for credit towards CE, and also language and regulation for verification of attendance for live interactive classes.
You mean live interactive via
Sorry.
video
Yes.
conferencing?
Yeah, I don't see any of your faces, so I'm a little kerfuffled right now. So I wasn't sure if I was still here. Yes, exactly.
I think those are good agenda items. Thank you.
And then I don't know if this is an agenda item, just wondering about possibly having a deadline for receiving public comment, maybe 24 hours before the meeting, or I don't know if that is possible.
In reference to the written
Yes.
public comment.
Yeah, just giving us time to review it. I'm with you on that. Yeah.
I get them very late, and I would like to give it the appropriate attention. So I don't know if there's a discussion that needs to happen around receiving that in a certain time frame.
Yeah, I concur with that.
Are there any other future agenda items?
That's all I have.
Hearing none. Moderator, could you please open agenda item number 6, future agenda items for public comment?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have opened up the Q&A panel. If any member of the public would like to comment, please type comment using the field in the lower right-hand corner of your screen and submit it to all panelists, or simply raise your hand. We'll give you a moment. All right, I'm not seeing any requests for comment. Shall I close the Q&A panel?
Please, thank you.
You're welcome.
And so agenda item number 7, if we could move to that, scheduling the 2023 committee meetings. I'd like to just make a suggestion that just due to time constraints and that we might have staff poll the members for future meeting dates. Is there any objection?
I concur.
I agree.
It takes a little time anyway. It's sometimes a little difficult. You have to have all your calendars in front of you, and so it's sometimes easier to get the poll and be able to kind of take some time to check everything before you.
We have January 4th, so we can do it then. That'll give us after the holidays.
Yeah, actually, can we just do it January 4th so it's kind of happens versus waiting, or?
Yeah.
Sure. Unless, go ahead, Kristen.
I would suggest that staff will send a poll out next week to the members, and if for some reason we can't decide on dates offline, that we'll bring it to the committee on January 4th.
Okay.
Perfect. Okay, and moderator, can you open agenda item 7 for public comment?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I am opening up the Q&A panel. If any member of the public would like to comment, please type comment using the field in the lower right-hand corner of the screen and submit it to all panelists, or simply raise your hand. We'll give you a moment. All right, I do not see any requests for comment. Shall I close the Q&A panel?
Yes, please. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, moving to agenda item number 8, adjournment. I'd like to adjourn this meeting. Thank you all. Thank you to the public who attended. Thank you again to reiterate the board members and my appreciation for the package that was presented to us was very well done and very thorough and very well thought out. And so thank you to Ms. Walker and staff. And the time is 2:39, and I don't believe we need a motion, so we'll adjourn this meeting. We'll see you in January.
See ya. Happy holidays, everyone.
Thank you.
Same to you.